Amy Winehouse went to help a starving, homeless man. What he did to her was unbelievable. It was a cold December morning in London when Amy Winehouse decided to leave her Camden apartment early. The sky was grey, heavy with clouds promising snow, and the streets still slept under a blanket of silence that only the early hours of the day can provide. Amy walked through the familiar streets, wearing only a thin coat and her favourite boots, her tousled hair dancing in the icy wind that cut through the city like a sharp blade. She wasn't going anywhere in particular. It was one of those mornings when loneliness weighed more heavily than the cold, when her inner demons whispered louder than the distant traffic. Amy was going through one of the most difficult times in her career and personal life. The tabloids were relentless, hounding her relentlessly, turning her every misstep into a sensational headline. Blake, her ex-husband, was in prison, and she felt as if half her soul had been ripped from her chest. But that morning, something different would happen, something that would change not only her day, but her perspective on life and herself in ways she could never have imagined. As she walked aimlessly through the streets of Camden, lost in her tortuous thoughts, Amy nearly tripped over something. Looking down, she saw a man huddled against the red brick wall of an abandoned building. He was covered in old newspapers and cardboard, shivering violently in the biting cold of the London morning. Amy stopped dead in her tracks. There was something in the man's face that touched her deeply. It wasn't just his apparent need, but a quiet dignity that emanated from him even in his desperate situation. His eyes, though tired and scarred from life on the streets, shone with an intelligence that surprised the singer. "Sorry," Amy said, her husky voice breaking the morning silence. "Are you okay?" The man looked up slowly, as if he couldn't believe someone was actually talking to him. When he saw Amy, his eyes widened slightly, but not with celebrity recognition. It was something deeper, more human. I'm fine, miss," he replied, his voice weak but polite. "Just trying to stay warm." Amy noticed he hadn't asked for anything. Not money, not food, not even attention. There was a genuine humility about him that touched her in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Without a second thought, she took off her coat and offered it to the man. "No, I can't have that," he protested, gently pushing the coat back. "You'll be cold." "Please," Amy insisted, her eyes beginning to shine with unshed tears. "I have others. When was the last time you ate?" The man hesitated, clearly embarrassed. "It's been a few days," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Amy's heart broke. Here she was, complaining about her privileged life while a human being was starving just feet away. Without hesitation, she reached into her wallet and pulled out every last note she had, nearly £200. "Here," she said, holding out the money. "Go get something hot to eat and find a place to stay." But what happened next left Amy completely speechless. The man looked at the money, then at Amy, and gently pushed her hand back. "I can't accept this," he said, his voice firm despite his evident weakness. "Not without doing something in return." Amy was confused. "You don't have to do anything. I just want to help." "Everyone has to do something," the man replied, struggling to his feet. "Dignity can't be bought, miss. If I may ask, you seem distraught. Is there anything I can do for you?" Amy was stunned. Here was a man who clearly had nothing, offering help to her, who apparently had everything. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. I don't know," she stammered. "My life is a mess. Everyone hates me, the press is hounding me, I can't stop drinking, using drugs. I feel like I'm sinking and no one cares." The man studied her for a long moment, his piercing eyes seeming to see straight into her soul. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the floor beside him. "Let me tell you a story." Amy hesitated for a moment, but there was something in the man's voice that reassured her. She sat down on the cold floor, leaning against the brick wall. "My name is Edward," the man began. "And believe it or not, 5 years ago, I was one of the most successful lawyers in London." Amy looked at him in disbelief. "Really?" "I had a house in Belgravia, a Porsche, a beautiful wife, 2 wonderful children," Edward continued, his distant eyes lost in painful memories. "I thought I had it all. But I was so obsessed with success, with making more money, with impressing the right people, that I began to neglect what really mattered." He paused, shivering slightly in the cold. "I started drinking to cope with the pressure. First just after work, then during lunch, then, well, you know the story. I lost a major court case because I was drunk. My wife left me, took the kids. I lost my law license. Within months, I lost everything." Amy felt a lump in her throat. "I'm so sorry." "You don't have to be sorry," Edward said, surprisingly calm, "because it was the best thing that ever happened to me." "What do you mean?" Amy asked, genuinely confused. "Because it was only when I lost everything that I learned what truly mattered," Edward explained. "When you have so much, it's easy to forget what truly matters. When you have nothing, every small kindness, every act of compassion, every moment of genuine human connection becomes as precious as gold." He gestured to the street around them. "Living here on the streets, I've learned more about myself and life than in all my years in plush offices. I've learned that happiness doesn't come from what you have, but from what you're able to give. I've learned that true wealth lies in human connections, in the ability to touch someone's life, even if only for a moment." Amy was silent, absorbing his words. "You said you feel like you're sinking," Edward continued. "But have you ever considered that maybe you need to sink a little deeper to find out who you really are beneath all the fame and expectations?" "But everyone expects so much of me," Amy whispered. "My music, my image, my behavior. I feel like I can't breathe." "And who are you when you strip all that away?" Edward asked gently. "When you strip away the fame, the expectations, the money, the drugs, the alcohol, who are you, Amy?" Amy was silent for a long time, really considering the question. Who was she, really? I like making people happy with my music," she said finally. "I like it when someone tells me that one of my songs helped them through a hard time. I like taking care of the people I love, even if I'm terrible at it sometimes." "So you're a caregiver," Edward said with a smile. "Someone who uses their art to heal. That's an incredible gift." "But I mess up," Amy protested. "I self-sabotage. I hurt the people I love. I make terrible choices. And that makes her human," Edward replied. "Perfection is overrated. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is where true strength lies." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the city slowly awaken around them. Amy felt calmer than she had in months. "Edward," she said finally, "you said this was the best thing that ever happened to you. But don't you want your old life back?" Edward smiled, and for the first time, Amy saw genuine peace in his eyes. "You want to know something interesting," he said. "Last week my ex-wife found me. She's been looking for me for months. She brought our kids to see me." Amy perked up. "That's wonderful. Are you two going to make up?" "She offered me exactly that," Edward said. "An apartment, help rehabilitating me, a chance to start our life together again. And you will accept?" Edward looked at Amy with that peaceful smile again. "I told her I need time to think. Because I've learned something important from living here. I can't go back to who I was. That man was empty inside, despite all his outward richness. If I go back, it needs to be as a different person, someone who has learned the true value of things." "And what is the real value of things?" asked Amy. "This is what we're doing now," Edward said, gesturing between them. Two strangers from completely different worlds, sitting on the cold floor, sharing their stories, offering each other support. It costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Amy felt tears streaming down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness or despair. They were tears of recognition, of gratitude. "You gave me something no therapist, no friend, no family member could give me," she said, her voice breaking. "Perspective. Nah, and you gave me something no amount of money could buy," Edward replied. "The opportunity to make a difference in someone's life, to use my experience to help." Amy stood up, extending her hand to help Edward up as well. "Come on," she said determinedly. "I'll take you out to a decent breakfast, and then we'll figure out how we can help each other." "Amy," Edward said. It was the first time he had used her name, though it was clear he had recognized her from the start. "Can I give you some advice?" "Of course. Stop trying to be perfect for others. Start being authentic to yourself. Your music is powerful because it comes from a real place of pain and experience. Don't try to hide it or fix it. Embrace it, use it, transform it into something beautiful." Amy nodded, feeling a determination she hadn't felt in years. "And Edward, you should accept your wife's offer, but not to go back to who you were, to become who you learned you could be." They walked together through the streets of Camden, a world-famous singer and a homeless man, two human beings who had found exactly what they needed in the most unexpected place. On that cold December morning, Amy Winehouse had left her house feeling lost and desperate. Now she walked with renewed purpose, not because someone had solved her problems, but because someone had shown her that her problems didn't define her. They spent the next 3 hours in a small cafe, talking about life, art, redemption, and second chances. Edward shared stories from his life on the streets, not just the hardships, but also the moments of unexpected beauty, the small kindnesses of strangers, the lessons learned in life's hardest school. Amy talked about her music, about how each song was a piece of her soul put into the world, about the constant fear of not being good enough, about the crushing pressure of being an icon when she just wanted to be a person. "You know," Edward said, finishing his second cup of coffee, "there's a reason people connect so much with your music. It's not because it's perfect, it's because it's real. You sing your pain, and that gives other people permission to feel theirs." "But what if my grief destroys me?" asked Amy. "Then you turn it into art before that happens," Edward replied simply. "Pain can be destructive or creative. The choice is yours." When they finally parted that afternoon, Amy gave Edward not only money, but her personal phone number. "I want you to call me when you decide what to do about your family," she said. "And if you need help with anything at all, call me." Edward smiled, putting the card away carefully. "And I want you to call me when you feel lost again," he said, "because we all get lost sometimes. The difference is knowing we don't have to find our way alone." In the days that followed, Amy found herself constantly thinking about the conversation with Edward. She began to see her life through a different lens. The tabloids still hounded her, but their words seemed less venomous. Her problems still existed, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. She called Edward a week later. "I've decided," said the familiar voice on the other end. "I'll take Sarah up on her offer, but I'll do it my way. I'll start slowly, rebuild trust, and I'll dedicate at least half of my time to helping people who are going through what I went through." "That's wonderful, Edward," Amy said, genuinely happy. "And you, how are you feeling?" "Different," Amy admitted. "I still have all the same problems, but they don't seem to define who I am anymore. I started writing new songs. Different. More honest, if that's possible. I'd like to hear them someday. I'd like to play them for you." They met again 2 weeks later, this time at Edward's modest new apartment, where he was living while slowly rebuilding his life. Amy brought her guitar and played some of the new songs she had written. The songs were unlike anything she'd done before, still charged with emotion, but with an underlying hope missing from her previous work. They were songs about finding light in the darkness, about unexpected human connections, about the strength that comes from vulnerability. "These songs will touch many lives," Edward said when she finished, "because they're about finding hope in the most unlikely places." "As I found it," Amy said, smiling. "As we found it," Edward corrected. Months passed. Edward landed a job at a non-profit that helped homeless people, an irony not lost on either of them. His relationship with his ex-wife and children gradually improved, built on a foundation of honesty and humility that hadn't existed before. Amy released a new album the following year, and although she still struggled with her personal demons, there was a different strength in her music. Critics noted an emotional maturity missing from her previous work, a hope that tempered the raw pain that had always characterized her style. She and Edward kept in regular contact, meeting monthly for coffee and conversations that had become essential for both of them. They had become, improbably, each other's best friends, two people who found each other at the exact moment they needed each other most. "You know," Amy said during one of their meetings, "people always ask me about life-changing moments, about big events, important performances, awards, and I think about that cold morning when I almost tripped over you on the street. That was the moment that really changed everything." Edward smiled. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing." "What were you doing up so early that day?" Amy asked. "I never asked." Edward was quiet for a moment, then sighed deeply. "I was deciding whether I wanted to continue living," he said simply. Amy felt the air leave her lungs. "Edward, I was in a very dark place," he continued. "I had lost hope that things would ever get better. I had stayed up all night planning to end it all. My God. But then you came along," Edward said, looking directly into her eyes. "And you didn't just offer me material help. You saw me as a human being. You treated me with dignity when I had completely forgotten I had any. You gave me a reason to believe I could still make a difference in the world." Amy had tears in her eyes. "You saved my life that day." "And you saved mine," Edward replied, "literally." They were silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what they had shared. "There's something I've learned," Amy said finally, "about how small acts of kindness can have consequences we never imagined. And I've learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters," Edward replied. "So maybe," said Amy, "the lesson is that we are all just one chance encounter away from completely changing our lives. Or saving a life," Edward added. Years later, when journalists asked Amy about the influences on her more mature music, she always mentioned a friend who taught me about dignity in adversity and strength in vulnerability. And when Edward spoke to support groups about recovery and redemption, he always spoke about a young woman who reminded me of my humanity when I had completely forgotten it. Neither of them ever publicly revealed the full details of that cold December morning, keeping it sacred between them. But they both knew they had been part of something extraordinary, a moment when two lives intersected at the precise point of greatest need, creating an alchemy of mutual healing that would change them both forever. Amy and Edward's story has become, in their own lives, a constant reminder that compassion is a transformative force, that vulnerability can be a source of strength, and that sometimes life's most meaningful encounters happen when we are at our darkest. And in every song Amy wrote after that day, in every life Edward touched through his work, the echo of that December morning continued to reverberate, proving that a single act of kindness can create ripples of change that spread far beyond what either of them could have imagined. They had discovered incredibly that saving someone and being saved can be exactly the same thing.